I always tell people, when you're using words, no one, everyone, always, never, those are a clue to old wounds. So part of this is to realize the breakup is what happened. The divorce is what happened. The death is what happened. Heartbreaking in itself. But on top of that, we layer a story.
That was one of the world's foremost experts on grief and loss, David Kessler, talking about how to not make a heartbreak worse by getting caught up in old wounds and old stories, whether that's a heartbreak from a breakup, from a divorce, or from a loss of a loved one. Today's podcast is one of these episodes I'm going to be saving. The real honor on my side to be able to host this interview with somebody who's had a profound impact on my life in recent months, but I will also be going back on this if life takes me a turn. All of us at some point in our life, if you haven't up until this point, will experience grief and loss in some shape or form, whether that's heartbreak from a breakup or a divorce or death of a loved one or death of a pet. Grief shows up in lots of different ways. In today's episode, after the first 10 minutes or so, once we get through the introduction, every 5 minutes, there's just nuggets of gold. This is one of the episodes that I think there's an immense amount of value. You're probably going to have to re-listen more than once. And hopefully you get as much from today's podcast as I did. If you're someone who's struggling at the moment or has some emotional baggage from a past relationship, a divorce, or just unhealed or unseen or unfelt grief through either pet loss or loss of a loved one, a family member or a friend, then today's episode is for you. So without further ado, here is today's incredible conversation with grief and loss expert David Kessler on finding meaning from breakups, divorce, and death of loved ones. Enjoy. Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of the podcast. I'm delighted to be joined today with my guest, David Kessler. David is one of the world's foremost experts on grief and loss. His experience with thousands of people on the edge of life and death has taught him the secrets to living a happy and fulfilled life, even after life's tragedies. He's the author of 6 books, including the most recent best-selling book, Finding Meaning, The Sixth Stage of Grief. He co-authored 2 books with Elisabeth Kubler Ross, including On Grief and Grieving, updated her 5 stages of grief. His first book, The Needs of the Dying, received praise from Saint Mother Teresa. David's personal experience as a child witnessing a mass shooting while his mother was dying in a hospital helped him begin his journey. For most of his life, David has taught physicians, nurses, counsellors, police and first responders about the end of life, trauma and grief. He facilitates talks, workshops and retreats for those experiencing grief. However, despite his vast knowledge on grief, his life was turned upside down by the sudden death of his 21-year-old son. It inspired him to write his newest book, Finding Meaning. He is someone whose work has had a profound impact on my life in recent months, and the world is truly a better place because of him being here. He is also the founder of www.grief.com, which has over 5 million visits yearly from 167 countries. I'm looking forward to talking all things loss and grief in today's show. David, an absolute honour. Welcome to the podcast.
So glad to be here with you.
David, I said right before we went on air, the impact you've had on my quality of life when I came across your work several months ago, and I've gone through all of your books because that's how I consume. When I find a message that connects with me and resonates with me, I am so glad that I get to bring your message to people who might not be familiar with your work, because grieving, whether that's a breakup, whether that's a loved one dying, whether that's a pet dying, you cover this in your books as well, or divorce, it can be such a life tragedy that a lot of us feel stuck in. And as a jumping off point, I want to use the line that metaphorically knocked me to the floor when I heard it, and that is, which grief is the worst? And in my mind, I went to divorce, I went to breakups, I went to death, but I have brain tattooed your answer. Can you talk to us a little bit about which grief is the worst?
Sure. We often, anyone can make a case for which grief is the worst. Is it obviously a loved one dying? Is it a child dying? Is it a murder? Or wait a minute, is it a divorce, a breakup where someone's on the earth rejecting you every day still? I mean, we could, what about your pet that's there every single day for 17 years? I always answer that question. The worst loss is yours. It's the one you're going through. And it really isn't about what other people are going through. It's really your loss. And the reality is, when we're trying to compare losses, we're in our mind. And we don't have a broken mind, we have a broken heart. So if we can sort of let go of which is the worst and just be present for our own.
With that, you don't have a broken mind, you have a broken heart, which is another line that landed me when I heard it first. Talk to us a little bit about the dangers of comparison.
Yeah, well, it's about judgment. And judgment demands punishment. We're going to punish ourselves or punish other people. And we don't have access to anyone else's loss. We only have access to ours. And it's the one for us to work on. And yet, when we're just in our mind, we can't help ourselves. In fact, we kind of harm ourselves in those moments.
Something that I was very unaware of before I came across your work was one, that heartbreak is a form of grief, and something you talk about is that when you have a breakup or a divorce, you have to grieve potentially the relationship and also grieve the future that you thought would potentially be part of your life, or the story that you had in your head or in your mind. Talk to us a little bit about the heartbreak being a form of grief, because this is really obvious to you and probably some others. It was very foreign to me at the time. Talk to us a little bit about heartbreak being a form of grief, because heartbreak shows up in different shapes and forms. For me, it was in the form of a breakup. For others, it's divorce, death of a loved one, death of a pet. Talk to us about heartbreak being a form of grief.
Yeah, it's very much a form of grief. And, you know, I have experienced so many of them in my life, and I know how awful breakups feel, how the pain of betrayal can just be awful, how divorce, how relationships end are just so hard. And a few things about that, I think of everything as a death. So, for example, I think of a breakup is the death of that relationship in that form. A divorce is the death of a marriage. A betrayal is the death of the trust. A job loss is the death of that paycheck with those people in that place. So it's always a death. It's something ending. And breakups are brutal. Relationships ending are brutal. Like I said, you know, someone said to me, and it's so true, like, someone's on the planet maybe rejecting you every day, and you now have to live with it and find your life.
What is the steps? And I'm going to go back into the 5 stages of grief: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance, because I had a couple of misconceptions around this as well. But I'm curious, with somebody that is struggling with the early stages of grief, what's the best way to go from 0 to 1? I think if I'm not mistaken, because I read a lot of your books in a very short period of time, I think it was the one with Louise Hay, where you talk about the positive affirmations and reframing the stories in your head and changing the story in your head. What's the 0 to 1 process for those who are in the middle of grief right now and they don't really know what to do or where to go next?
I think the surprising thing is there's no one right way to deal with loss. There's only your way. You know, the stages aren't 5 easy steps, and it's not like you got to do 1 to 2 to 3. You know, you can experience 4 and 1 and 3 and 2, and it's just, you know, our mind is like a washing machine when it comes to grief and loss. But I think the first thing is to know, if you're in heartbreak and you're in deep pain, you're playing the game of life. You're in life. This is a journey that's filled with highs and lows. And this is just a valley you're walking through. And there is no helicopter to come get us out of the valley. We're just in the valley. That's the reality of it. And I think to let that pain be and to be curious about it. You know, I think so many times when we're in pain, naturally, we just wanted it to be over. But what if we said, I want to understand this pain better. I want to be with this pain better. I want to go through this pain. And here's the thing. When we're in this pain of grief, it feels like it's never going to change. I always remind people, no feeling is final. No feeling is forever. Whatever you're feeling is going to change. But even more than that, grief has a way of revealing our old wounds. Let me tell you, whenever I've been in a breakup, a relationship ending, I didn't get to just go through that breakup. My old friend, abandonment, came to visit me. So I'm like, are you kidding? I'm barely hanging on in this breakup, and my old wound of abandonment's going to show up? Well, that's not fair. But I had to remember that abandonment coming up wasn't to complicate things or to make them worse, but to help me heal. And here's the thing. In life, we're going to go through these, hard times. That's just part of life. No one escapes them. You might think by looking on social media, everyone else is fine, but I promise you, everyone gets these things. And here's the thing we have to remember about them is when they happen, they're going to reveal those old wounds, but they're also going to take us on a path that's going to help us, if we allow everything to come up, arrive at whatever's next a little more healed and in the moment. Like, who wants to go to the next relationship and build the new relationship with the fallen bricks of the old one? So we want to build things anew. And if I showed up in this moment, Brian, with every podcast that's gone right, that's gone wrong, you'd be like, David, forget those old ones. Just be here now with my audience. And I'd be like, I can't. You don't understand. 2 years ago, this podcast, they really, and it'd be like, dude, you're missing this moment. That's the way life is. And the more we work on our stuff, it's actually the way we're going to find more happiness.
It's so interesting that you say that about, it jumps back to the comparison mode of what people are doing on social media online. And I even use my own example when I was going through a breakup in October, November, when I could barely pull myself out of bed, but I was able to, on some occasions, do a podcast or do a consultation call or do some of the videos, and then I'd go straight back to bed after because I felt depressed. And you don't see that because you're not putting up an Instagram story that you're in bed depressed and you're not feeling good. So that comparison is really important, to know that you're working through your grief, whether it's a breakup, a divorce, or, God forbid, a death of a loved one. Very difficult things to move through, but your process is going to be your process. I want to touch on the 5 stages of grief because...
But hang on. Can I ask you questions?
Yeah.
What made that breakup so hard in your situation? And you don't you don't have to go here if you don't want, but...
I thought, David, for me, it was in-game. Because we were engaged, I thought it was the last relationship I was ever going to be in. And I had, ironically, through the several years of the relationship, many grievances for other things. And maybe this is me specific, focus group of one, but I knew that I'd never have sex, or I thought I'd never have sex with somebody else. I thought I'd never be with somebody else. So I had these mini grievings, but I was choosing, this is what I want. And then when my partner left at the time, and on reflection, the relationship dynamic wasn't a good one. She's a very good person, a very good soul. Our relationship dynamic wasn't good, but for me, it felt like in-game. And your language earlier, and I came across it in your books and your YouTube videos, was that the death of a relationship and the death of what you thought life was going to be really resonated with me. And I think that's part of the reason why it hit me so hard.
And those feelings of endgame, never going to have sex again, never going to love again, those feelings are the one I remind people that they're going to change in time. It's okay. Just be with what you have. And here's the thing that I think gets us, and I don't know if you felt this. It's not just the grief of that person leaving, but you believe not only did they leave, but your soulmate got away. The one you were supposed to be with got away. And if your soulmate gets away, you're in trouble. And that's pretty depressing. And in time, what I help people realize is your soulmate isn't the person who leaves. Your soulmate is the person who stays.
Matthew Hussey, who I've spoken to a little bit on Instagram, we're hopefully do a podcast at some point, because I came across, you did a great conversation with him and the YouTube video is on. I'll link it in the description for people. And he speaks about the one isn't the person who leaves. The one has to choose you as well. And it's really interesting because something that helped me indirectly, this was a seed you planted with a book or a story or a video, I can't remember, was about healing your grief by changing your story. And that soulmate story for me is it was a very toxic story at the time, because if you genuinely believe your soulmate left, you're going to be heartbroken and you're never going to come out of this. And I'm, 9 months out of it now. I'm in a great place. I'm very fortunate, seeing other people now. I've got amazing people in my life. My business is thriving. I'm very grateful for the experience. And reality, to be honest, David, I'd never had my heart broken before. So it was the first time I got through 36 years of my life, 35 years of my life without really having my heart broken as an adult. And so it was very new territory. And that's why I found it so difficult. I've been fortunate that I haven't had any death of loved ones close to me in my adult life either. A little bit in my teenage years, I had people close to me die, but not as an adult. And so I haven't had to focus on grief. It's why I came to your work a little bit later than most, and I'm grateful for that, because I haven't had to seek it out. And I think the people that are struggling now will get amazing benefit from your work. But something that helped me, similar to the soulmate story you said there, is healing your grief by changing your story. And I came through one of your courses where you spoke about this. Talk to us about healing grief by changing the story.
Yeah. Affirmations, people get those confused. They think affirmations are, I'm feeling stupid, so I'm going to say I'm smart 100 times, and that's going to fix everything. I'm not going to feel stupid anymore if I say I'm smart 1,000 times. A few things go wrong with that. Some people will say, I don't believe in affirmations. Everything we say, Brian, is an affirmation. People will come on and say, I don't do affirmations, they're too hard. They're too hard is an affirmation. I can't heal is an affirmation. My life is ruined is an affirmation. Those are all we're affirming something. So part of the work is to have awareness that every day we're affirming something. And that's just life. So what I teach about is there's an event, and then we have a story around the event. The event right now is I'm doing a podcast with Brian. That's just the event. It's very neutral. Now, I can walk away, you can walk away with stories about that was so good, that was so bad, that was, David was great, David was awful. Those are all the stories. Now, here's the thing. Many times, we bring a story from our past even onto this moment. David came on just right before. He wasn't there for me. No one's ever there for me. I always tell people, when you're using words, no one, everyone, always, never, those are a clue to old wounds. So part of this is to realize the breakup is what happened. The divorce is what happened. The death is what happened. Heartbreaking in itself. But on top of that, we layer a story. Everyone's always going to leave me. No one's here for me. Well, that's my abandonment talking. That's not even about the event. That's an old story I bring to it. So the more we can be aware of our stories and of our thinking, the affirmations we're doing, So when we talk about these affirmations, it's really just paying attention to our thinking, a little bit of positive psychology. A couple things, if I may. When people hear these affirmations, they think I just got to say the opposite. I feel stupid. Let me just say I'm smart. When I talk about using them, you have to do a few things. When you go, I'm noticing I tell myself I'm stupid a lot. So then you have to go, okay, let me bring in the word and, A-N-D. Also, let me concretize a real life example of the opposite. So here's what I mean. I feel stupid. Because sometimes we do this. I feel stupid. Oh, no, I'm smart. Oh, I'm so bad at affirmations. And then we beat ourselves up that we're bad at affirmations. But to ideally go, I feel stupid. Okay. And I was smart enough today to come on early and make sure I was ready. So I give my mind a concrete example of something I'm doing in the now that is smart. But then we just think we should stop there and just keep saying the smart things. I got to go back and go, where does I am stupid comes from somewhere. People aren't born with I am stupid. People aren't born with I'm not worthy. Those are old wounds. And the thing is, Brian, when they come up, we're often like, oh, why is my darn abandonment coming up again? But I say, don't treat it like an enemy. It's an old friend knocking at your door, asking for healing because it wants you to be happy.
That's so powerful, David. And a line that I regularly repeated to myself when going through difficult times was, if I don't heal my core wounds, I'm going to bleed on people who didn't cut me. And that's something that sometimes is an anchor, as a story that you mentioned earlier about bringing the bricks from an old relationship into a new one. You want to start fresh there. I always ask myself when it's a question comes up or a story comes up like that, I'm not worthy, I'll never love again, I'm unlovable. That's a very frequent one for me based on childhood experience, life experience, and coming into that counter example. But I ask myself, if I hit a factory reset on my life, on my emotions, would I feel this way? And in a lot of cases, the answer is no, that I've acquired this and I've experienced this and I've been giving this on my life journey. And that shows that it's directly proportionate to me, because you ask 100 people, they might not have the same problem. And I think it's a good thing to come back on, which ties in nicely to something else I came across. And I think it was in Finding Meaning, about grief, that it needs to be witnessed. I had a story before the breakup in particular, and I hate using myself, focus group of one, but that's my experience. It's how I came across your work. No, so it's an anchor to the point.
About ourselves, so.
Yeah. But grief must be witnessed. I was under the illusion that I could keep things to myself and I could take a lone wolf approach, because historically it's got me external successes in life with fitness, with business, etc. But with this, it didn't seem to work until I came across that line that grief must be witnessed. It was in Finding Meaning, your book, which I'm going to link in the description for people. I highly recommend they check it out off the back of this podcast. But talk to us about grief needing to be witnessed.
So think about this in war. What's the cruelest thing we can do to people in war besides killing them? Is we put them in isolation. Isolation doesn't heal anything. It just makes things worse. Now, there is a moment that we sort of maybe isolate a little bit and lick our wounds and see what happened, but we heal grief and trauma by other people. The thing is, other people hurt us, so we need other people to heal us. And you can't do that alone. The lone wolf was something you did to survive in your childhood. It was a protective thing you did. And you don't need to do that anymore, and it may not even serve you. And in your childhood, somehow, to protect yourself, you put a suit of armor on, and you sort of went inside and you shut down for safety, kept everyone out. No one said, hey, Brian, it's okay now. You can take the armor off. You're an adult. You got yourself. No one. So we come in armored up, isolated, and then something happens and we go back into the isolation. So that's part of our challenge. And we need someone to go, I see how painful this is. I see how sad you are. I see how much you're hurting. Now, here's the key. We don't want to bright side people. If you say to me, I'm in just so much pain, David, I am never going to love again. Oh, yes, you will. You're going to be fine. She's right around the corner. There's someone new. That's what we call bright siding or positive toxicity. The hope is good later, but right now, I just need to see you where you are in pain to help us heal. That's what we need to do. And to look at, like, for you, I'm not worthy comes from somewhere. I'm curious if you were to tell me for you the opposite of I'm not worthy, what would that be?
The opposite of I'm not worthy. I'm enough would be my language.
Even a little more than I'm enough? I'm enough sounds like just am enough. Just made enough.
My own biggest critic, David. You're piercing right through the armor there. I would say the opposite of I'm not worthy is that I deserve to be loved. I deserve to be happy. I deserve to be fulfilled. There's a lot of I deserve and I matter that comes into my language.
So let's just think about I am lovable. Try that on for a minute and say,
I'm lovable.
No, I want you to know that's your true essence. That's actually the true voice inside of you. All the other voices are your old wounds. There is a kind voice inside of each of us. And that's actually the real us. We don't even know that's the real us.
For someone that's listening,
you didn't think we'd go do therapy, huh?
I didn't, and I appreciate it because I'm very grateful that the universe sent me your books and your work and now this podcast. But for those that are listening, because there's a lot of people who are similar to me with different stories that hold them back. They've got, I'm not enough, I'm not lovable, I'll never find love, I'll never get over this, I'll never get over this death of a loved one, etc. And it normally comes back to those old wounds or those core wounds. I've done a lot of work, years of therapy, over the past few years on different issues that I had to work through my life, from childhood stuff to early adult stuff. And I really struggled with that early stage of moving through it. From your experience, having worked with thousands and impacted millions at this point, for those who struggle to do that deep work, where they're actually getting to those old wounds, those core wounds, because they're really difficult. I'm a fitness guy. I'm a certified nutritionist, personal trainer, fitness. The gym is a place where you go in, you do the reps, you get the results. Business is you put in the hours, you tend to get the financial reward. The deep work, emotional, is so much harder because it's trying to do a Rubik's Cube blindfolded at times because you actually don't know what the correct path is. For those who are struggling to do that work, what is a starting off point or a question they should ask or an avenue they should go down that could potentially kickstart that healing process? So
I think the first thing, and I'm going to use a technical term, when you're in early pain, whether it's a breakup, a divorce, a loved one dying, a pet loss, when you're in that early pain, the technical term that we just have to make peace with is it sucks. It's just horrible, and me or anyone else can't get rid of that. So we have to allow ourselves to walk through that. And here's the thing. Just really think this through and keep this in mind. What we run from pursues us. What we face transforms us. when that pain hits, if we run from it, it's going to follow us for the rest of our lives. If we face it, it will transform us. It will change us. It will heal us. Now, we have those stories. They were my soulmate. I'm never going to live again. They died. I can't live. All of that. I'll tell you a common story we have, especially around death, if anyone's had a loved one who's died, is living again would be disloyal. Believe me, around my younger son's death, living again would be disloyal. I had to really work through that story and go, gosh, my younger son so wanted me to be happy in this life. So wanted happiness. That story's not true. Here's the two things we have to do with any of these losses. We have to grieve them fully and live through them fully. We have to grieve fully and live fully. Some of us know how to do the grief and we get stuck there. Some of us know how to do the living and we ignore the grief. We got to do both to find what's on the other side. And what's on the other side is still life and still us with that amazing kind voice in us that wants us to have a life while we're still here and while we're in this story. And I just want to say, you mentioned you do fitness. I can't tell you how many parallels there are. I mean, imagine me coming to you and saying, I want to work on myself. I really want to get in shape. So can you start working on my friend? You'd be like, no, it doesn't work that way, David. I can't work on your friend's muscles for you. I can only work on yours. Yeah, but Brian, my other friend. No, David, it doesn't matter. I don't care who else is going on. We can only work on you. Oh, big thing. Because in grief, we often want to, well, you know what she did? It kind of doesn't matter. We can only work on you. Now, the other thing is we don't have these muscles to go through this in our awareness. We're about get to the peak, get to the top, win, beat, and we haven't worked the muscles of, we got to go through this pain. Like no one works out in a gym and goes, oh my gosh, the heavier these are, wow, they feel great. No, it's hard. It hurts. But that is the growth that's on the other side.
Interestingly, you say that because one of my mental gymnastics for therapy, and I stole it straight from fitness, when you work out, and David, from any time you trained or worked out, you get what's called DOMS, delayed onset muscle soreness, where you get this soreness after you work out and train. When you go to therapy or start doing this work first, you end up exposing and becoming more vulnerable temporarily. And I had to reframe that as emotional DOMS, emotional delayed onset muscle soreness, because I would historically distract or numb out or turn to drugs or alcohol or sex or any distraction that temporarily took me out of it. And when I started to understand that actually when I sit with this pain that I've now unpacked from reading a book or having it witnessed in therapy or a conversation with a friend that's been difficult, but they've helped me layer or unpack some of those layered emotions, that can help a lot, because it can be really scary for people when they go to therapy and they're getting worse, because you tend to get worse from my experience before you get better. You become more vulnerable, more exposed, and it's just easier to shut it all down. And that line, what we run from pursues us, gives us a beautiful entry point to what buffaloes can teach us about grief. Talk to us about buffaloes. And
let me just tell you real quick, the thing you said about it gets worse is an affirmation.
Okay. From my experience, I was affirming to myself that it gets worse. Okay, I well caught on the language.
And, look, another story could be, wow, when I work on myself, everything that's in the way of my healing gets revealed. Now, our stuff getting revealed, not always the greatest thing, but it is what we have to go through for our healing. So in the last book, Finding Meaning, I studied buffaloes. I never thought I'd be studying buffaloes. Buffaloes will, when they sense a storm coming, they run into the storm. And by running into the storm, they minimize the time they're in pain. Now, think about us as humans. When loss, grief comes along, we run from it and thereby live with it for our lives. I mean, how many people do we know? Oh, what's wrong with your friend Jane? What's up with your, friend Bill? Yeah, years ago they had a bad breakup. Years ago they had a divorce. Years ago they had a death and they've never recovered. I mean, we all know people that sort of got hit and unfortunately stayed down. And that doesn't have to be the case.
With getting back up, and that's a very difficult thing, and positive affirmations can help, having your grief witnessed, sitting with it, but also understanding some of the ways, from my language, and feel free to correct me, is how my body or emotions trick me. And a line I came across from you was, anger is a bodyguard for pain. And when I was in the deepest parts of it, I found the story was, my anger is at least getting me to move. It's better than sadness. There's nothing worse. There's lots of things worse. Let me rephrase. But that feeling of sadness when you're crying and you feel like it's never going to stop. That's a horrible feeling that I wouldn't wish on my worst enemy, because it just, tears flow and they just, it's like a river that just is never going to stop. It does stop. I remember you saying in the book and in your courses, it will stop at some point. But talk to us about anger being a bodyguard for pain, or even mislabeling some of those emotions when we're trying to get out of the most difficult parts of it.
A lot of us, our go-to feelings are sadness or anger. If I suddenly get hit with a breakup, a divorce, a death, I go to anger. I'm, pissed and I'm yelling, and that's me. Other people go to sadness. They sit down in the chair, and people who sit and cry get a lot of compassion. People who get angry, not so much. Everyone's like, David, step out, get it together, then we'll talk to you. Like, go handle your anger. What we don't realize is the anger is exactly the same pain that the person who's crying has. One gets expressed through tears. The other gets expressed through anger. And I always say anger is pain's bodyguard. We meet the bodyguard first, the anger, but underneath is the pain. And it's really hard when someone's angry to understand they're in pain. I mean, that's the advanced course in this for our friends and loved ones. The next time someone's yelling at you, to really go, oh, wow, they look like they're really angry, but they're actually in pain. Because, when someone yells at me, I get defensive. But if I can go, oh, they're in a lot of pain, let me be compassionate.
With the anger and the sadness, because I found that for me, it was a cycle, generally between those two things. But what I didn't understand, and I mentioned this earlier in the episode, but the 5 stages of grief, and obviously the 6th when it comes to finding meaning, but denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. I didn't understand or know at the time that those cycle, it's not a linear path. I thought you went from denial to anger to bargaining to depression to acceptance. And I found I was very confused, particularly by the acceptance, because there was elements of acceptance and then I'd go back to anger, and there'd be elements of acceptance and then I'd go back to depression. And it was cycling for me. Is it common, and this might be a really straightforward and simple question, but this caught me off guard because I didn't know this was a thing. Do people regularly have a misconception around the stages of grief when it comes to the linear or non-linear way that they feel them?
Elisabeth Kubler Ross, who was my teacher and co-author, is the one who identified and came up with those 5 stages. And I was honored to work with her on a book to adapt them from dying to grief. And she always talked about grief is organic. It's not linear. Like there's no do one, then get to the other. It's exactly like you said. One moment I can be in a little acceptance, and then I get an acceptance, and then I get angry, and then I get angry, and then I get sad. And that's all in 10 minutes. You know, grief is messy. Grief is very messy. And we have to allow the mess. In grief, we have to allow the mess. And it's hard to do. And I'll tell you, Elisabeth was certainly no one who wanted anyone to follow rules or do anything neatly. She would have found this, 5 steps, and then you're done, ridiculous. I mean, and those, stages come up with a million things where like, I can't believe I've got a flat tire. I mean, we do them all the time, but they're helpful to some. And if they don't resonate with other people, you don't have to use them. Just, be with your grief. It's really to like be with where you are and allow it to take you to the next place. We think of grief work as self-help. Think of when you're in a breakup, a divorce, a betrayal, a death. You don't need self-help. We have to find self-acceptance. Where am I right now? And is that okay? People go, I'm stuck. And I go, yeah, judgment will get us stuck. And they'll go, I'm not in judgment. And I'll go, well, stuck is a bit of a judgment. Stuck is, I should be in a different place. I should be moving faster. Why am I still here? And look, I'm sure that's just as true with your work. Someone might go, wait, we've had this many sessions and I feel stuck. And you go, you just got to keep going and it will change. All of a sudden, you'll see a difference. But any given moment, we could go, I'm in the wrong place. I'm stuck.
I felt very called out in a good way from one of your courses that spoke about that. And my language was, I just thought I'd be further along by now. And that's a judgment.
Yes. It's a judgment and it's an affirmation. I'm doing, and I should be further along. Yes, I'm not doing it right. I'm doing it too slow. I'm doing this wrong. I'm not advancing. And look, think of it. If someone literally came into your gym and you said, all right, let's get started. And they sat down and said, doing it wrong. I'm not advancing. Something, you'd be like, well, come on up. Come on up and let's do the work.
It's so interesting that there's so many fitness parallels with grief for sure. And I might be misquoting you, David, because I'm not sure if it was you or one of your co-authors, so correct me if I'm wrong here. But I think you said, be with your grief, but don't live in it. Is that correctly attributed to you, or was it possibly to one of the co-authors?
We don't want to make our grief our identity. We don't want to make it who we are. It's what we're experiencing. It's what we're going through. It's not who we are. It's a place we visit. It's part of life, but we don't want to stay there and live there.
I think that's a very important distinguishment to make as well, because as somebody that historically, better with my later life, has an all or nothing approach, you can sit with it but not let it become your identity is a very important story, affirmation, language to use. If you were similar to me, again, I know focus group of 1, but there'll be others who'll be similar. David, I've just got one final question that I want to ask about finding meaning, because I'm at that stage now where you're obviously always going to be healing a little bit, but it's considerably further along, and I'm finding a lot of meaning out of my particular circumstance. But before we get on to the final question, I'm going to link grief.com. I'll link all your social medias in the description of the podcast, and the books, most importantly, and the YouTube channels and some of the videos that we mentioned, because anyone, and I can put hand on heart, when I came across you and found you first, I was in a very low place, very difficult place. I felt very lost. I felt like I was navigating a jungle with a blindfold on, and having some of the language and some of the content that we've even touched on in this podcast today helped me navigate through it. So I just want to acknowledge and say thank you so much for your work, and for people listening to check it out. Yeah.
And for people listening, if they've gone through a death, we have a program called Tender Hearts that's an online grief group, and we have people in it from all over the world. So that's if you've had the death of a loved one. I also have another program that a lot of people are in it from the UK and Ireland, a grief educator program. A lot of people want to turn their pain into purpose and learn how to help others. And so that's also a great resource. And I'll tell you, finding meaning, some people didn't like the title. They're like, I'm not ready for finding meaning. And, it's a little like if you had a place called, get in shape, and people are like, well, I don't want to get in too much pain to get in shape. I'm going to lose weight first, then come get in shape. You'd be like, no, come in. Finding Meaning is a book really that's about excavating the pain and the meanings underneath. And one of the things I've been working on, and it's finally going to be coming out soon, is a workbook that people can use for finding meaning. It's actually shockingly already on Amazon. It's the blue one. So if anyone's looking, look for the blue one on Amazon. Because I think we need a little help walking through this.
Which ties in perfectly to my last question. Finding meaning, for me, I try to do it early on because I think it's part of my personality type, or the stories that I regularly repeat to myself, that this had to happen for a reason. And there is a stage when it was too early. Several months in, it became clearer. And now 9, nearly 10 months later, there's a lot of meaning in it. I see, okay, this is going to impact how I show up with my daughter if she ever has her heart broken. I'm more empathetic for people that are around me. I am now in a position to potentially step into another relationship, a much better and stronger version of me, and a more healed me with less emotional baggage. And this is a bit of a Pandora's box of a question, so feel free to take it in any direction you like. How do we go about finding meaning from loss and grief and difficult times and pain in particular?
I think when we hear meaning, we think it's like something to get to right away. And you do have to dig out all the pain underneath first. And it's revealed. Michelangelo, the great artist, said, he doesn't picture the statue inside of the rock. He chips away all the excess. So we have to chip away all the excess. And I think we think meaning is in the horrible event. And it's not. There's no meaning in a bad breakup. There's no or is there a bad breakup or a good breakup? But there's no meaning in a breakup. There's no meaning in a divorce. There's no meaning in a betrayal. Meaning is in us. It's what do we do afterwards? And it's not just, Brian, what are you going to do after this breakup? But it's also, who are you going to be? Are you going to be in the next relationship wounded Brian walking in with all his old hurts, and you're just watching her to see if she's going to be like everyone else who's hurt you? Or are you going to find some healing? And healing, I always tell people, healing just means the event no longer controls you. If I make all decisions from my last breakup or divorce or death, that's meaning I'm not finding healing. Healing is when, of course I remember the breakup, of course I remember the pain. I don't forget them, but I don't make decisions. I don't live from those bad events. So to find meaning, we have to realize it's in us. It's who we're going to be. It's how we're going to show up. What are the places that you can be different from that last relationship? Where can I be more loving, more generous, more kind? Where did I let my old wounds get the best of me? And if you're in a relationship with someone, you're in a laboratory and your old wounds are going to show up and you're going to have to work through them. But can I do that maybe in a kinder way than I did last time, an easier way? And maybe that's just the meaning, that you're a little different because of everything you've gone through. You know, we talk all the time, Brian, about post-traumatic stress. You know, people do come out of relationships with some post-traumatic stress. Or you can also come out of it with post-traumatic growth. And that's the meaning. Do you have to just go through it, or can you grow through it?
What a phenomenal way to finish, David. As I said, I've got even more from this conversation than I thought I would, based on someone who's consumed nearly everything that you've written over the past couple of decades at this stage. Keep doing your tremendous work, and I implore everybody listening to go check out your content, check out your books, check out everything we've mentioned in today's podcast, and thank you so much again.
Thank you. Appreciate being with you and everyone.
That was grief and loss expert David Kessler on finding meaning from breakups, divorce and death of loved ones. As I mentioned at the top of the podcast, I think this is one that I'm going to be going back on more than once, and probably want to save in your repertoire if you are and life does take you a turn. I'm going to be doing it anyways. If I have grief or loss and need to just kind of stay on top of it again. His books, as I mentioned in the episode, tremendous. His courses online I've also came through, and I'm so grateful that I got to host this conversation today. So hopefully you got as much from it as I did. If you did, please leave a rating and a review, or hit me up, take a screenshot, tag it up on Instagram. That's everything from me from this week's episode. Catch you all next Monday.